Well, hello, everyone. My name is Christy Tarpley, and I am one of the faculty advisors for the Social Work Student Association. And I'm so excited that you are here. Some familiar faces. If this is your second session with us for today, welcome back. And if this is your first session for today and you're seeking CEUs, please be sure to put your name in the chat so that we can have you here, get you, accounted for those CEUs. Also, there will be an evaluation survey at the end, so you want to make sure that you stick around for that, okay? So if you are here for our self-care session, you are in the right place. We have our OUSWK faculty member, Ms. Kirby Bewley, here to discuss with us some self-care tips and items. So Kirby, I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself and take it on away.
Excellent. Well, hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We are halfway through the week. I don't see all of your faces, but I do recognize several names. So for those faces I do see, or those names I do recognize, it's good to see you again. If not, then welcome. And I'm glad that you were able to join us for today for this presentation. So I've done this presentation previously in a longer format. I have condensed it down for this 45-minute session. So there may be times where I'm speeding through it a little bit, or, I'll probably not be able to do like any kind of chat discussion or things like that. So just no worries about interaction with this, because I want to make sure that I get some content to you. Okay, so let me see if I'm set up to screen share. I am. Good to go. So I'm going to share my screen and then we will get started, everyone. Okay, so I have to get myself all set up with my two screens, all that fun stuff. Okay, so first I'll introduce myself. My name is Kirby Bewley, and I am one of the instructors on the Norman campus. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I previously worked at a community mental health center in Oklahoma City, and I've been at the school for about 3 years now, primarily teaching practice classes. So talking about what this role looks like in the field. And so today I'm going to talk about self-care, and I'm going to talk about self-care when it seems like nothing is working. So I'm going to add in some information here about COVID, and I'll go into this further, but what we're experiencing with the pandemic right now is that most people are at a place where we've exhausted our typical coping strategies, our typical self-care strategies. I don't know if you all feel this for you and your individual situations, but it just feels like we have reached a threshold where we have so much less give when it comes to managing stress. So we'll talk a little bit about this educationally, some of what's going on, and then I'm going to provide just a few tips. If we have some time, then we can add some other ideas or tips into the chat. But again, I'm condensing it down, so we'll see how it goes. Our agenda for today is that one, we'll talk about how COVID and the pandemic is trauma. We're living through a real life, real time traumatic experience. We're going to talk about self-compassion, which I think is foundational for what we need to be doing for ourselves and teaching our clients as social workers. So we'll talk about physical self-care, mental self-care, and then some practical strategies in our presentation today. So when it comes to the COVID pandemic in the United States, these were some statistics I pulled last fall, but I'm sure there is even enhancement related to these things. There is definitely an increase of anxiety and depression and an increase of ACEs in our population due to the pandemic. Social isolation has a connection to increased chronic health conditions and mental health difficulties. And so in the studies that they've done are just simple isolation from being able to see people face to face on a regular basis, being able to go into our workplaces, being able to meet with our clients face to face. Those things just in and of itself have significant impacts on our mental and physical health. That lack of getting the need for community and social interaction met is really detrimental to us. Specifically, the things that are pulled out of the research are things like cardiovascular risk, suicide risk, etc. And like I shared, this is exposure to a wide scale trauma. Such as 9/11, something where it impacts a lot of people, and it shows the long-term impacts of health and mental well-being continuing to be brought forth in the research and the literature. So here's what I want to add on to this as I'm talking about our tolerance and our resiliency to stress decreasing. When we have an event that is such as a natural disaster or a terrorist attack, usually what happens is it is a one-time event. This has happened and now it's over, and now we're working towards recovery and recuperating from that. What we've been dealing with for the past year plus is something that there's not an immediate end in sight. Yes, people are getting vaccinated. Yes, we're seeing some preventative measures assisting with what it means to be in this communal state of awareness of illness, but we still don't have an end date. So we haven't even stepped into the phases of fully processing and grieving and recovering from what we've been experiencing over the past year. So we're still going to feel that in our bodies and in our minds on a daily basis. So as I shared, I wanted to make sure that I talk about self-compassion, because what I've seen is that when we are at the end of our rope, at the end of our threshold, when we're struggling with our stress levels, self-compassion is something that we can lean into that helps us reframe our situation and helps us take the next step forward. And the great thing about self-compassion is that you can actually learn it. It will decrease our stress, increase our productivity, and ultimately increase the empathy and connection to others. So in this graphic I have here, it talks about how with self-criticism, you are stuck in this cycle of beating yourself up. But when you're motivated by self-compassion, we learn that failure is not an indicator of defeat, but is a learning opportunity. And so in those times where we miss a deadline because we are realizing that we're just struggling to stick with work and classes and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and sleeping well in the midst of everything that's going on, we can lean into the self-compassion and say, okay, this is where I'm at in this moment. What do I need to do to help remember the next deadline? Can I go and talk to my employer? Can I go and talk to my instructor to see if there's something that can be changed? And maybe I can still submit what I need to submit. Instead of allowing it to be what we use to continue shaming ourselves, we're able to move through it and past it. So again, if we lean into the self-compassion, it'll give us the motivation and encouragement to keep moving forward. So now let's talk about physical health. So many of you have heard about cortisol. This is a Google pulled image of what cortisol looks like when you're in the scientific world. But cortisol is a stress hormone that is released into our system. And there are multiple research studies that talk about the detrimental effects of cortisol on our systems in a long-term basis. And previously, we were doing a lot of research around what this looks like in kids, what this looks like for victims of domestic violence, and how the stress causes the body to focus on survival rather than the other things that it could be focusing on: growing, learning new things, finding ways to improve the work that we do day to day. Cortisol distracts from all of that because it looks at how it can help our body survive in the midst of a stressful situation. So what we know about cortisol is that it can actually cause our body to store additional fat and energy to help protect us. So as a defense mechanism to previous societies, when there was a fear that we might not have food or nourishment available to us, cortisol helped tell us that we needed to store it for ourselves so that should starvation occur in the future, we would have some resources to lean on. And I bring this up because I just want us to sit and think about what it was like last year when we started to see shelves emptying. And we started to wonder about, are we going to have access to toilet paper, right? It started to pump this cortisol into our system to say, oh no, there is a lack of something. What we also see is that it suppresses our immune system. So think about all those times where you've been really stressed out and then you also got sick on top of that. And that's very common because it keeps our body from thinking about fighting off the things that are invading our system, viruses, bacteria, etc. And instead, it's still telling us we need to rest. Some of the causes that it brings to our health problems are digestive issues, cardiovascular issues, insomnia, and even dementia, as we see prolonged cortisol pumping in our system for long-term amounts of time. So what I want to bring up with this is that going back to that self-compassion, I know many of you, this is primarily focused to students. I know that many of you probably feel like you have to work harder right now to learn something new, to remember your deadlines, and to keep everything organized. And what I want to say is that this is completely normal and is expected when you're dealing with increased levels of stress. And so instead of beating yourself up about it or letting imposter syndrome just run rampant in your life, because we know how powerful that is, you can then lean into self-compassion and say, you know what? I'm doing pretty good for where I've been right now. I'm doing pretty good right now. I got this paper in and maybe it wasn't an A, which is what I typically expect from myself. Maybe it was a B, but I still got it in. And that is good enough for right now. And that's going to help decrease your stress level so that you can start to learn more as you continue through the semester. So sometimes it's going to feel counterintuitive, but our bodies are trying to protect us with this cortisol chemical, and we just have to learn to roll with it rather than fight against it. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to body-focused self-care. Okay, so I am going to bring this up because we have heard a lot about people gaining weight, feeling like they're not as fit, or maybe feeling guilty for not going to the gym or doing the things that they would typically do during the past year. And so a lot of people are struggling with their body image and how they feel about themselves. Sometimes they think, well, I'm just an emotional eater, or I'm just addicted to food, and this is my coping strategy. And again, I want to take us back to that cortisol of your your body is trying to protect itself. Your body is trying to find a way to survive. So there may be times where you find that you have a greater desire to eat, and that doesn't mean anything about your capacity to, manage your behaviors or have some self-control. It is just a result of us being in this stressful situation. So then, here's what I want to make sure we all know. Instead of feeling guilty about where you might be regarding your body and your movement and the amount of attention you've given to that realm of your wellness, I want you to just go back to the basics. Eat when you're hungry. Don't skip meals because you think that you need to skip the meal because your clothes aren't fitting anymore. Make sure that you continue to eat, because that nutrition and those calories are what's going to help your brain start to reduce the amount of cortisol that's being pumped into it. If possible, buy clothes that actually fit you while you're in this space. And then find movement that you enjoy. Don't make it a punishment. Don't make it something that is too strict or not enjoyable for you. Use it as a way to manage stress, as an activity that you really enjoy doing. When you can kind of set aside some of this, I need to exercise because that's what's going to help my mental health, and that's what's going to, I'm going to have to fit it in, even though I feel like I'm not sleeping enough hours every single night because I'm staying up doing readings for my classes, or I'm staying up answering emails. Just set that stuff aside and say, what do I enjoy doing? Do I like going on walks where I can talk on the phone with my friend as a form of self-care, and let that be my exercise? If so, then let that be what works for you. And again, all of it comes down to stress. Letting it be something that can help us manage our stress, not dominate everything that we have going on. Okay, so now I want to talk about this when it comes to our thoughts and emotions. So again, this is this cycle that we run into. So increased stress decreases self-compassion and unhelpful coping strategies. But when we're also able to lean into self-compassion, it can decrease our stress. And so they really are seeking to balance each other out. Allow yourself to feel the emotions. Allow yourself to recognize the thoughts. Let that complete its cycle. And then you can continue moving into self-compassion. There's a book that was recently released. I have not read it yet, so I can't give you a full recommendation. But there is an author, Dr. Emily Nagoski, maybe is how you say her last name, around burnout. And one of the things that she is really pushing in her research for helping professionals especially is that a way to minimize burnout is to let the emotion complete the cycle. And what she talks about with this is that many times we experience emotions like anger. And instead of allowing ourselves to just feel it, we think that we're doing a good job by just suppressing it and not acting on our anger. When maybe sometimes we just need to scream. Sometimes we just need to journal it out. Sometimes we need to talk about it to someone else. Don't let that just stay in your system because you're trying to be mindful and thoughtful and stay calm. Find ways to release those emotions and let them complete their cycle. I promise you that emotions do not last forever. Emotions actually only last a few seconds or so at a time. What keeps the emotion going for us is the thoughts around it. The reason why we might feel sad for as long as we do when we are triggered by something that's sad for us is that we dive into those thoughts. So finding ways to keep us from getting stuck, processing through it, figuring out ways to honor our thoughts and emotions, but disconnect from them a bit, really can keep us from getting stuck in this negative cycle. I also want to talk about how toxic positivity is not going to help us. I don't know about any of you, but sometimes when I hear people that are like, let's just be positive, let's think about all the positive things. You're like, okay, great. But also, this is really hard. There is a space for gratitude. So having gratitude is different than toxic positivity. Having gratitude helps us think differently and reframe our situations. Toxic positivity invalidates what we're experiencing. And so there are some differences with that. Toxic positivity keeps us numb and keeps us stuck. And so we want to avoid that at all costs. So now we're going to move into the strategies for how do we do this?
Yes, could I get a small, oh, 1 second.
Whoops. Okay, so I was like, a small what? Interesting. Okay, so the first thing that we often have pointed out to us is that in times of stress or difficulty, we focus on structure. What's the structure? How are we planning our day? When people were initially moved to work from home, one of the recommendations was to try and keep a very similar schedule. So it felt like you were still going to the office and still doing your typical day-to-day activity. But we also need to recognize that that's not always realistic. So yes, structure can help us feel in control and manage our time. But we also know that trying to set plans when there's still several unknowns can also contribute to our stress. So too much focus on structure is actually unhealthy and doesn't allow us the space to be human. When we say, no, I absolutely have to get up at 4 a.m. to do my additional readings when I'm exhausted. Maybe we need to back up, allow ourselves to go ahead and sleep until 6, which is only 2 hours, and still getting up pretty early, and then figure out a different way to manage our day. We may not be able to plan super far ahead in our lives. We know that flexibility is resiliency in many ways, but find your balance. Figure out what structure you absolutely need. If it is your morning routine that you want to keep the same every single morning, keep that the same. If it is a weekly workout class that you go to or a book club that you're still a part of, keep that the same if that's what's going to work for you. But then also allow yourself to have the flexibility in your day-to-day life to know that if you need to adjust your daily schedule or your daily activities, that's okay. And that can be manageable. And it doesn't mean you're a failure if your structure didn't go exactly as you had planned that day. So again, bringing it around to self-compassion. And when we have more self-compassion, we can problem solve better and make sure that we still get those tasks done as needed. Now, moving into some strategies for daily routine and plans. So first off, I really love something visual. Having something visual, I think, helps many of us organize what we need to do. So this could look like task lists. Maybe it looks like a pile of things, and that when you finish it, you move it from the pile. Maybe you do Post-it notes, and once you finish a task on a Post-it note, then you can take that Post-it note, crumple it up, and put it in the trash. Maybe visual doesn't work for you. I like it because I get to actually see the progress that's happening. When it comes to these tasks, think about prioritizing by completion deadline. Yes, you may really want to work on this other assignment first, but think about what deadline you have coming up. Maybe you really want to dive into this reading that you have, but you need to submit your report for work. and that's going to have a deadline on Friday. And so go ahead and get that completed, and then you can schedule aside time to do the things that you're more interested in. If it doesn't always work out, just regroup, reassess. It's okay. Allow breaks for yourself and allow some rest. This is incredibly difficult to do at this time of the year for students. This is an incredibly busy time of the year. So with the semesters, March and April are super busy in the spring, and then September and October are super busy in the fall. That's just what it is in a semester. Now, then you also add in the fall, you have your holidays, but that's another discussion. But allow yourself to have some sort of break, whether it's 15 minutes here. I suggest more than a 5-minute break if possible. 5-minute breaks can be helpful, but give yourself a moment to step away, get up from your computer, walk around. One of the things that I also find really helpful is to add in short tasks that can be easily accomplished. So accomplishments actually hit that dopamine receptor in your brain and sends you these feel-good vibes. Okay, I crossed this thing off my list. I've completed this. So accomplishments can help increase our mood and therefore our motivation. One of the things that I did a lot in grad school when I was writing papers is that I would set a time for myself, which I'll talk more about with this Pomodoro technique. But I would set an amount of time for myself that I would work or study, and I would focus on that. And then I would pause, go and complete something, and then come back. Usually that was a household chore. Like I would pause, go and put up the laundry, and then come back to the task that wasn't done. And so that can be a way that you're feeling like, okay, I've accomplished something. It was a short task. It didn't take me that long. I finished it, and now I can move on, and it keeps you going. Now, the Pomodoro technique is the official name for this, where you set a timer. Usually it's 25 minutes. You work and you focus in for 25 minutes, and then you take a break. And you start with a certain number of short breaks, and then you have a longer break. And what this is honoring for us as humans is that our attention span only lasts so long. We want to say we're adults, we're humans. We want to say that we have a super long attention span. But actually, research shows us that we don't. Usually our attention span is more like 20, 25 minutes at a time, and then we have to shift. So using something like this, the Pomodoro technique, where you can focus for 20, 25 minutes, allow your brain to shift and then come back, might actually increase your productivity versus you just trying to power through it by trying to complete all of your readings and stuff them all into 2 hours, 3 hours or so at a time. Take some breaks in there, and it's going to actually help you process and retain some information. So the other thing that I want to make sure that I emphasize is how to encourage you all to ask for help. What I have found is that it is so much different to just say, I'm struggling, I need some help, versus I'm able to define and articulate what I need right now. And I'm going to ask for that specifically. Now, this may take some time, because often what we need, we have to reflect on in order to truly understand it. I listened to the audiobook for Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, just last week. And one of the things that she actually talked about was that in workplaces where there are high levels of exhaustion, many times what they also found was that there were high levels of loneliness. And that as people felt more lonely in their workplaces, they felt more exhausted. And to me, that says a lot about where we are with this pandemic right now. Many times what we may actually need is not a time to keep sleeping and, repair and fix our exhaustion in that way, but maybe we need time to connect with an individual. Maybe we need time face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom with our instructor to talk about our assignment, or with our supervisor to talk about a situation that's happening. And just being in that space together is what you need help with. I need help with this because I need someone to talk me through it. And that's all that you need in the moment. You'll want to determine who fills the need best once you identify the need. Maybe it's in the professional realm and maybe it's in the personal realm. You want to ask them directly and specifically. A very simple way to do this, I actually learned in consultation meetings many, many years ago. So when someone would staff a case and you just start saying, okay, I have this client, here's where we're at, what do we need to do next? The leader of the consultation group would, after you presented the case, ask, what do you need from the group right now? Do you need validation? Do you need encouragement? Or do you need solutions and problem solving? Because that's going to be a different discussion based on what you need. If you need solutions and problem solving, great. The group will step in and they will provide you solutions and problem solving. Here's your next step. If you just need to feel heard and have someone recognize that this feels tough or this feels heavy, they're not going to offer those things. They're just going to validate you. And that eliminated so many issues where people would bring something to the table and they just wanted to be heard. And instead, people would tell them what they needed to do differently. If you're struggling and you just need validation and someone's telling you what you need to do differently, that could just reinforce this idea that you don't think you're good enough, or the imposter syndrome, or whatever you have that's going on. And so being able to ask, I just need validation, I just need to vent. That's going to help whatever conversation it is go much better. The next item to focus on when you're asking for help is to be willing to reassess boundaries. Sometimes we put in boundaries that are a bit too strict. Sometimes we need to add in more boundaries. And we don't always know that that's we don't always know which direction to go until we're in the situation. And so be willing to reassess where you're at with your boundaries. Be willing to come back and say, I thought I could take on an extra client last week. I've taken on this client. This has put me over the edge. It's made me feel really overwhelmed and stressed out. I need to circle back around and have a discussion about my boundaries right now. Maybe I had initially planned to do all of my study sessions in the evening. And I thought, okay, I'm going to hold really firm boundaries and know that this is my scheduled time. But then as you started to try to do that, you realized that the evening isn't the best time for you to study. And so you reassess. You lean into that flexibility and you try to figure out what to do next. And then also allow yourself to say no to others. I always add a little asterisk when I talk about this, because the truth is that there are some situations where you may not be able to say no. Maybe you are in a place where, for example, let's say that you work in the service industry outside of your education. Sometimes what they'll say is either you need to work this shift or I will find someone else who will. And so you are stuck with the dilemma of deciding whether or not you need to stay employed or you need to say no and protect that day. This will go back to the boundaries, but you have to assess and say, what's the best fit for me right now? Think about ways that you can say no if someone brings something to you, even if it's a small thing, to say, actually, I need to take a little bit of a break from this. Perhaps even allow yourself to trust that if you ask someone for help and they say no, it doesn't mean that they don't care about you, but it's also perhaps that they're trying to help take care of their own mental and physical health as well. So to summarize, and then I'll have some time for questions or feedback if you all want it. So to summarize, where we're at in this current season in our world is that there are many things out of our control, many things that are causing ongoing stress without an end date in sight. Our bodies and our minds are getting exhausted and reaching their thresholds for resiliency. In order to combat this, it is not that we need to be more self-disciplined, that we need to plan better or do better. To combat this, we need to offer ourselves more self-compassion. We need to allow ourselves to fully feel our emotions and let them complete the cycle. And we need to lean into the spaces of community where we have it. We need to be willing to ask for help. We need to be willing to reassess our schedules and our commitments on a daily or weekly basis. And we need to keep ourselves from leaning into the negative self-talk, so much so that it causes our stress levels to just continue to increase. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share and I'll open this up if anyone has any questions or comments, things that you would like to share about this topic, or maybe even things that have worked out really well for you, if you want to share that in the chat bar. So, yes, okay, so kind of attending to the chat. Yes, so the book is called, Brittany Graves said that the book is amazing. So I'm excited once I read it. But it is definitely geared towards women. So keep that in mind. And I imagine it's likely geared towards cis women. So just, know that whenever you approach it. So it's called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. Professor Jennifer Dell also talked about a podcast. And then as a reminder, if you need CEUs, put your name in the chat. So opening this up, does anyone have any questions or comments that you wanted to share?
I will. This really touched on just about every experience I've had this semester. So I really want to thank you for the validation, because it's been rough sometimes.
Yes, and I feel comfortable saying this because of the conversations I've had with my colleagues. But I want you all to know, as a faculty member of the school, that we recognize this in what you all are experiencing as well. And that's part of why we are offering things like this, offering moments of validation, because we recognize that this is tough. And, I think that was Jennifer who spoke. I'm sorry to hear that you've experienced almost all of these things in this past year or so. But what I hope that you get out of this is that there's still so much hope for building future resiliency and moving past all of this. We just need to kind of continue to like doggy paddle or tread water where we're at right now, so that we can get to that point. Anyone else want to share?
This is Kathy Ishcomer.
Yeah.
I'm 69 years old, and when the pandemic started, I quit a part-time job. Fortunately, I didn't have to depend on that job. And in the very beginning, I think I had a lot less empathy for the younger people that had to go to work or had to lose their jobs and things like that. Most people are so concerned about the elderly being isolated. But I think in a lot of cases, there was the younger people and is the younger people. Now, my husband was in a VA center, and their isolation, I think, did a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And you can weigh the pros and the cons of that.
Mhm.
But many of us who had husbands or loved ones in the VA center saw dramatic decreases in their health after we were not allowed to do that.
Mhm.
But so many of the young people, I think, were really the ones that were impacted the most.
Thank you for sharing that. I talk in my classes all the time about how I am going to be so interested to see what research comes out of this experience for us. So looking at the different age groups and looking at the residual effects of being in this long-term state of trauma and stress. You know, Kathy, you're speaking about the younger generations. I wonder what it's going to look like for mental health and substance use rates in the next several years, even physical health rates. I just think it's going to be very interesting to watch for sure.
Well, I'm seeing on Facebook and various places, I'm seeing pictures of prom dresses and plans like that being made. And I have to think about last year's seniors that missed proms and dances and sports, you know, and those opportunities are not going to come back. And that was a particularly hard hit group, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions, comments?
I have one for Christy when everyone's through.
Okay.
I have a question for you, Kirby. When you talk about the timing and the countdown, is there like a website that you can go to that like counts down for you? I think I missed that.
So there is. So on that screen, the website, it was kind of small. You could also just Google the Pomodoro technique. Let me copy this and put it in the chat. But if you Google search the Pomodoro technique, then I put a website in there, pomofocus.io. That's where I pulled the timer image from. There are lots of different versions of it. And so you can find a timer, use that online. You can just set a timer on your phone or set a timer on your computer, whatever works best for you. But it's the general idea of working 20 to 25 minutes at a time and then taking a break after that. But good question for where to get that information.
Thank you. I plan on trying it. And I read that book, and it's really, everything you said about it really geared for women and maybe specific demographics of women is true, but it is a very good book. And I was happy that it talked about completing the cycle, because I found early on in my career as a counselor that I had to.
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good down here.
Oh, there's background noise. But, that I had to like go home and like cook dinner. I had to like start and finish something, or I had to go on a run, but I had to start and finish something at the end of my day, or I just felt very out of whack. So I was practicing those before I knew what I was doing. So yay.
Yeah. Okay, y'all. Well, we are at, on my clock, it's 12:44. So I have going to 12:45. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up 1 minute early as a gift for all of you. So I know Kathy had a question for Christy. So you all can chat about that afterwards. But I want to thank everyone for being here. It was good getting to see all of you, at least your names, while I got to talk about self-care. If you, I mean, just, I'm around the school. If you have questions or want to reach out to me, feel free to do so. Just let me know and we can get
Yes.
connected.
And Kirby, thank you so much for presenting. This was very helpful to me.
You're welcome.
I'm sure to all of us. And thanks again for everyone that has attended. Again, if you're seeking CEUs, that evaluation survey link is in the chat. You can go ahead and fill that out. If this is your first and last session, but if you're going to stay with us for the rest of the day, you can fill that out at the very end. So Kathy, I'm going to take your question, but for everyone, we're going to go ahead and take the 15-minute break. And I'll stick around too if you guys have any other questions outside of that. So thanks, Kirby.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, you explained this in the beginning, but I didn't quite understand.
Mhm.
I attended the first workshop. My name is in the chat. Did I need to sign in again as proof that I was in the second workshop?
You do not.
Okay, you've got some way of knowing I was there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. This has
You're
been
welcome.
wonderful so far. I hope to see you at 4.
All right.